There was one occasion on the Four Feather Falls film, there was a scene in the main street of the town at night. And it was meant to be everybody in the town was in the saloon. On the windows, which were tracing papered over on these windows, they wanted silhouettes of lots of things going on. Bob and I were both given the job of lying on the floor behind the set with cardboard cutouts of cowboys with big hats and holding them there, jiggling them about. And we were jiggling away, the two of us side by side, and that cut, that's it, thank you. We're going again, just wait. And then Bob turned to me and he said, do you realise there are men out now in the North Sea trawling for fish, battling with the elements, and what are we doing? We've got two cardboard cowboys and we're jiggling them about. He said, do you consider that a job worth doing? And then we had the giggles, and the next thing you know, somebody was screaming, we're running! Action! What? Oh. Jiggle, jiggle, jiggle.
When I first went to work at the studios, they were setting up ready for Torchy. Christine was in charge of making the puppets.
Christine was an absolute joy to be with, and we never stopped laughing. It was impossible when the pair of us were together. And she was a brilliant artist. She was a wonderful draft person and craft person too, as well as a very fine operator, one of the finest operators of marionettes.
Oh, I've a wonderful idea. I'll make a toy boy. Now then, how can I make a toy who can walk and talk and do all the things that real boys do?
The Torchy puppets were wood. There was no fiberglass used at that time.
Before that it was paper mache and stuff like that shrank. We started to use fiberglass.
Supermarionation is a new dimension in adult entertainment, and the actors start here in the puppet workshop under the guidance of Birmingham sculptor John Brown.
What we used to do is start with make a plasticine head.
It was much easier to model.
When you finished the clay and plasticine model, it was very, very carefully finished and polished. And then we used to paint them up and do a camera test, because it was much easier to alter them in the plasticine state than it was to do it later on. Paint it up for the test, clean the wig and all the other details off, then make a mould. And then from that mould, we would then make a fiberglass shell. And it was very important because fiberglass is very thin, very strong, and that's another thing. They have to be strong to stand up to a lot of explosions and God knows what around at times.
Someone will pay for this. International Rescue haven't heard the last of me.
There was quite a lot of technical advances. All these silicon rubbers were coming in, so you could make rubber moulds, because plaster moulds, you can't have any undercutting, and things like ears, getting the mould hooked behind ears, and if the faces were very caricatured, there was quite difficult moulding.
There was no cold cure rubber at that time. We had to use this stuff called Vinamold, which was heated in a special container, and it stank like anything. It was terrible. Fiberglass was a great invention for the puppet heads, I think.
Spend hours rubbing the faces down with wet and dry sandpaper, and so they were so smooth.
And then the painting and finishing and the wigs and all the other things.
Because they were filmed puppets, they needed to be quite detailed.
The first time we ever saw the finished film was on a big screen, not just a television screen, but a really big screen, and it was quite frightening. You know, you could see every slight blemish, and we couldn't have that. It all had to be perfect.
At the beginning of the series, it would be Sylvia who was in charge of the characterisation of the puppets. So she would tell us what she wanted us to portray, and she would oversee the modelling that we were doing as it went along.
We have a mental image of the character as it should be, and I think we develop it from there.
Do you sort of see characteristics in people you know, magazines and that sort of thing?
Yes, all the time, all the time. I think in actual fact what we do is we take a composite face In other words, we take the eyes of someone, nose from someone else, and so on. So we can then produce the perfect face for the character that we've invented.
We used to sit and go through Spotlight magazine with, the actors have a portrait of themselves. They'd go through that and sort of pick out people, not dead copies, but that type of face.
Will somebody tell me what I was like?
I only remember that being done for Troy Tempest. It was supposed to be like
James Garner.
James Garner, yeah. I think I made up most of the other ones. Yeah.
Mary was always very calm and precise and very clean in her work. These clean-faced heroes, which I couldn't do.
The dark, good-looking fellow at the table. Yeah, he could be just the type we're looking for.
Every week it meant making probably, 6, 8 different figures, which you didn't have very much time to start thinking, even drawing about with them. And so I would just start carving and creating these things completely out of my mind, never sketching or anything. And later on what we did, we had some shells made, just white shells with the eyes and the mouth mechanisms in.
What we called revamped puppets. Their faces were purely plasticine on a plastic shell so that they could make the incidental characters.
It was a very fast process really to model the plasticine onto them directly and then put endless coats of emulsion paint to put a skin on it.
But sometimes, because the revamps were plasticine, they could get dented.
And there's quite often accidents where there's a puppet in shot and the camera rolled and the figure turned his head, wanted to turn back, caught the wire and the wire just sliced his nose off. With string figures, marionettes, they are the most difficult things to work with. And it's more a science than art, the construction of these, so they move well. So this is a typical kind of marionette body. That would be used in any puppet theatre, to be quite honest.
With the puppets we used, we made a few innovations. We put a third string to the forehead on the head. There was one either side on the ears, which took the main weight of the puppet, and another one on the forehead, so you could look up and down, which was not normally used on puppets or on a stage. It was all much cruder, really, the whole thing.
It has a combination of joints, actually. This is what we call the tongue and groove joint. This is a typical joint again, which is a brass plate. It allows quite a lot of movement. Later on, I changed the whole designs and made the body parts a ball and socket joint. All the rest of the arms and legs had ball socket joints. Again, so there's a lot of free, easy movement, but would stop the costumes getting trapped.
As well as looking true to life, these puppets of tomorrow can talk like human beings as well. A magnet fixed to the back of the head receives electric impulses which move the lips in perfect time to the words they speak.
So on the bridge above our heads were 5 copper wires, and they had a wire attached to that could move up and down the bridge to where we were, and you'd plug into A, B or C, plug it into the top of the puppet control, and it would go down the head strings that went down to here and into the head to the solenoid.
You can say that again.
The first bridge that I remember was when we were at Islet Park in Maidenhead. That was a fixed bridge.
And that gave Gerry the ability to shoot more or less in any direction without getting the supports in.
They were filmed more like a real film would be done rather than just as a puppet film.
You would do a master shot and then you would do the left and rights and the reverses and close-ups and yeah.
And then the first bridge when we moved to Slough was suspended from the rafters.
So you had to have a ladder.
The bridge was like another world. It was like being an island.
And sometimes they'd forget to put the ladder there, so you were stuck up the bridge.
Anybody who wanted to pee had to ask, and there were times when the crew would say, nope, you've got to stay up there. We'll give you a bottle.
The one main bridge there had 2 rails because the figures would work over the back and over the front. And Roger was quite an athletic character, and there was one point, and very hot, you can imagine, and very hot, he stood with his feet one each side on this bridge, so that we could work beneath his legs. And there was this funny thing where Roger used to wear a hand-knitted string vest, and because it was rather boring through the shooting, Christine noticed the end of this piece of string and gradually pulled and pulled and pulled until Roger was left with just the neckband and the armbands of the string vest and a pile of string on the floor.
Sometimes the floorboards had to be taken up so that you could actually work through the floor, so the puppet was in a further back position, so you could have layers of puppets, some in the foreground and some in the background.
When we moved to Stirling Road, we had these huge, great new bridges that were on wheels.
You have the control at the top, which is basically a wooden crisscross arrangement, and then the arms, well, the legs particularly, are on a cross piece that you unhook and can pull away, and then that operates from wires to the knees. The strings were attached in all different places for different things. Like the pistol being pulled out of the holster and fired, we just do that as about 5 or 6 strings with 3 or 4 puppeteers, one just holding the puppet up top, but all the operating was done down just out of picture on the side.
Reckon we better get on back to Four Feather Falls.
There was one on the elbow and one on the barrel of the gun, and probably undercrank the camera a little bit, speed up the action.
Get up there! Come on! Get up! Get up! Come on, ride!
It was quite interesting because at the time, Christine and me particularly, were rooted in the theatre. And Mary's family had puppet theatre. So Mary got a background there.
If you work in a normal marionette, the strings are about 4 foot. And the marionette ones at the studio were sort of 6 foot strings.
6 or more.
More.
It was very, very difficult to operate a figure from a high bridge with long strings, and particularly very fine wires, which meant you couldn't make any quick movements because the wires would snap. And it's a special technique even in the theatre of actually swinging the figures before they move on to get the rhythm going, to create a walk.
And this business of them swinging when they walked, there was like a resonance. You start them walking, and because the rhythm of the walk happens to hit the resonance for the length of those strings, they would start swinging and you couldn't stop them. You'd be just like a child on a swing. So I experimented with these weights in the shoulders. And it worked very well, but then of course it added weight to the puppet, and the burden of the person up top got even more severe.
A lot of the time it was fun, but a lot of hard work.
Because as you probably know in later series, the figures never walked very well. That's because the bodies were wrongly cast and wrongly balanced.
Phones, the escape hatch. Marina! She must have heard us. She's going into the tunnel.
I guess she figured she'd be the only one to help because she can breathe underwater.
Get the sea bugs. We're going after her.
But we'll never make it.
We've gotta make it.
When Marina was swimming, although she wasn't actually in the water, she was the other side of this narrow tank. At one side would be a wind machine, which would blow her hair back and her costume so that she looked as if she was actually swimming in the water. I was more or less became a downstairs puppeteer, and that was really my job, re-stringing, attaching the strings and passing them up to the girls to attach them at the top. And to start with, you used to have to ask the camera technicians to sort it out, and they were sort of a bit like asking Godzilla to do some brain surgery. They sort of, oh, it seems to have come off, you know. And so the downstairs puppeteer became quite important in order you could actually sort out arms that were twisted the wrong way and bits of clothing that were sort of off shoulders and things like that. Basically it was A&E really for puppets, fixing things, you know, and holding their feet.
I think you know the plan, Joe. Mac has managed to record the brain patterns of a Russian MiG-242 pilot. And now he's going to transfer all that captured knowledge to you.
It's a shame, really. I mean, this is my hobby horse when it comes to Gerry's puppets, was that he was always trying to get away, trying to get to reality. There's much more character, I think, in the puppets
of this proportion. The others, they might as well be humans. Why bother with puppets? Because it had to look so lifelike, it's very difficult to get any character into it. In fact, most of the Captain Scarlet men seemed to look too much like each other, and it was difficult to tell them apart sometimes, I felt.
As long as they had their coloured shirts on, you knew who they were.
The great strength of puppets is that you can have caricatures, unbelievably outrageous caricatures. And you can do lots of things with them that you can't do with actors, which is the same thing in reverse. You say, well, you know, the puppets can't do what actors can do. But you can turn that on its head.
Parker? Oh, dear. What could have happened to him? Look, there he is.
My point that I always made to Gerry was that the puppets were puppets. Don't try and pretend they're real people. If not, use real people.
With operating the characters, obviously the strings on the head of the small puppet are closer together, so it is more difficult to actually make them work, and you can't really give them so much character in the movement as you can with the larger head.
Dr. Conrad, this is Bill Williams, in charge of airport security.
How do you do?
Doctor, well, Captain Scarlet, Flight 104 leaves in 15 minutes. Although you're the only passengers, the plane takes off on schedule.
And from 8 foot above the Captain Scarlet puppet, it's very difficult to actually get the head to turn, however loose the joint is. So sometimes we would stand beside the puppet and actually turn the strings by hand from about a foot above it.
Filming takes a lot to get what I call all the plates spinning on their sticks together without one of them about to conk out. You get one right, the other's about to fall down. This was a big strain on the puppeteers because they were holding puppets.
The puppets are really quite heavy. We used to have to stand for, not hours, but ages, holding the puppets out in position while the cameraman lit, and then we did the shots and that.
As soon as they were ready to go, you'd unhook the puppet and push the gallows out the way, and then there'd be another problem. Or, oh, that's where it is now, because when it's held in the hand, the puppet was different from when it was hanging on the hook. So all the camera crew would, oh, we've got to change everything. And you'd be holding this thing. And it was very hard work. And of course, as arms begin to go down and then the puppet's knees begin to buckle, and it's time for refreshment.
The puppeteers all worked in with everyone else, and it was all very amicable, and except for the electricians, who unfortunately belonged to a union that stated what they should do and what they shouldn't do.
I plugged in a hairdryer. I was doing Lady Penelope's hair, and this chap said, "Oh, no, you can't do that. I've got to do that." And I said, "Oh, all right." I said, "Well, so we can't touch anything electrical?" "Oh, no. I said, "Well, will you plug the puppets in when we need, when we're going for a take?"
So we invited them to come up and plug in the puppets instead of us. So this rather large electrician lumbered up onto the bridge and had to do this plugging in. But he soon got tired of that. It was too much trouble, I think. They'd rather be down in the set and sleeping in their little corners.
At that time, it was a lot of fun in that studio, and we all knew each other very well. And so we got on very well together. And that's really what makes it work. Really, this puppet playing business is a real team job.
And it was better than a lot of other jobs. I don't know how I treated it with not much reverence at all. But of course, what has happened since, it's become cult. It's become a cult thing, and therefore you tend to re-examine it.
Gerry never really wanted to be doing puppet films, but he did throw himself into doing it. But I don't think he could have done it without the crew that was assembled at that time. We were all quite young and enthusiastic.
We were a good team, actually, that had a lot of fun, and I think you could see it.
Great job. I'm really proud of my international rescue team today. Bye.